Good day, students. We are talking about Christianity. And in our last discussion videos, we talked about the story of Jesus and what that meant to the world in the first century. And now we're moving into the early church, the Apostle Paul, and other historical progressions in Christianity. The Jerusalem church was the Jewish church. James, the half-brother of Jesus, and Simon Peter were the major leaders. The first Christian martyr, Stephen, is part of this. He was denounced because Stephen presented the history of Jesus, and he was denounced and stoned to the streets. This church used similar hymns as Judaism. It used similar baptism practices as the Jewish Pharisees. They did not view themselves as separate from Judaism at the beginning. And they did not believe that Jesus is God incarnate. That's too big of an idea at this point of view. Instead, at this point, he's the Messiah. The idea of God incarnate takes a while. That doesn't mean that they didn't believe. It's just the concept took a while. From Paul to the Trinity, throughout history, it just took a while for that concept to unfold. Remember, Jesus did not tell the disciples everything according to the stories, the narratives. He made them think on their own 2 feet. We have a image of Paul here, the Apostle Paul. He did not believe that Jesus was the prophet or leader of the gang of disciples of the Jews. He was a Pharisee, but he changed his mind after he went through he was struck down by a light from heaven, and then he changed his mind and converted to Christianity. So he had a mystical experience. He's the member of the Jewish Pharisees. He trained in Jewish Hellenistic traditions. He witnessed the persecution of Stephen, was struck down by a light from heaven, and immediately converted to Christianity. He wrote many of the great letters wrote many letters that consistently criticized his view of false doctrine. Okay, so he wrote many letters to make sure that Christianity stayed on the right path, that it did not go down the wrong path. And he focused on the cosmopolitan areas of the tradition, those places that were tended to be non-Jewish places. He focused on converting these places to Christianity. There's more we could say about Paul, but we'll move on. Paul focused on, taking a look at some of these different theological controversies, and he tried to keep Christianity on the right path. But nevertheless, there were many different theological differences in the first century and into the second century as well. One of those controversies is Gnostic Christianity. Gnostic Christianity focused on Christ's divinity and denied the human form as a significant component to Christianity. So Gnostics did not think Jesus was a human being, that he was some kind of divine incarnate form. So they denied the human aspect of God, of Jesus. This is a Hellenistic dualistic view, the separation between spirit and body. Remember, I said that Jews viewed the spirit and body as a togetherness, so it's non-dualistic. But this Gnostic Christianity viewed things from a very dualistic point of view. And this dualism plays out as this concept of heaven and hell are created. You have this dualistic element to Christianity these days. There's another development called Marcionism. It focused on this concept that there's a creator, God of justice of the Old Testament, and a God of goodness in the New Testament. So this very much sounds a little bit like Zoroastrianism, this idea of a God of justice, of anger and jealousy, and then a God of goodness of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. That's something else that played a part in early Christian controversy. Last but not least, Montanism focused on the Holy Spirit as the guiding principle, uncontrolled by Christian dogma. That would deny logic, for instance, and just the emotional aspect of the Holy Spirit as the guiding principle. And the Apostle Paul always tried to talk about the Holy Spirit and that there should always be witnesses present. If, for instance, somebody starts speaking in tongues, there should be somebody there to translate those tongues to the people within the churches. So Paul did focus on Montanism and trying to understand how to make it where the Christian doctrine worked for everybody, where there weren't these cults that showed up. So we have the New Testament. We have a picture here of Jerome. He looks very interesting in this particular photograph. Historically written down by second and third generation Christians between approximately 50 to 150 CE. The Apostle Paul's letters are some of the earliest letters that we find related to Christianity, and then the Gospels, the four Gospels, are written down between 50 to maybe 150 CE, or a little bit less than that. I think maybe the Gospel of John is closer to the 100s. Manuscripts of hundreds of individual Christian texts circulated independently among the early churches. And the Vulgate is the first official Bible by the Roman Empire in 382 BCE. Jerome commissioned by Pope to bring order to the chaotic texts. So you have all these texts. What do you have to do? Which ones are authentic? Which ones are not? Which ones are best? How should we organize them? That's a lot of power and responsibility given to Jerome. The question remains, did he get it right? Once again, Paul's letters are the earliest dated written accounts between 50 and 60 CE. I have seen some scholars put the texts even earlier than that at 40 CE. But this is as close as we can get to accuracy. Only 7 of his 14 letters are historically traced to Paul. So Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1st Thessalonians, Philemon are some of the major letters that Paul had written, and the others may have been written by other people. Next, we have the Gospel of Mark. It was written down around 70 CE, so 70 years, 66 years before the birth of Christ. This text is based on the earliest accounts of Jesus, possibly composed elsewhere in the Roman Empire, because it shows weakness in the Palestinian geography and Jewish customs. So some scholars think it was actually written down in Greece or Macedonia or somewhere like that. It does refer to the Jewish temple being destroyed in the Gospel of Mark. So we have that time period, 70 CE. That's kind of gives us a geographical and historical background of it. I have a picture here of the Greek New Testament on the side. Matthew and Luke were next. They were written down around 80 to 85 CE. A lot of the same words are borrowed from Mark and an unknown source. Luke also references the Jewish temple destruction. There's a term called the Synoptic Gospels. That means that they give similar accounts of Jesus. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels. Then we have Saint or John, the Gospel of John, written around, there we go. I was close. I said 190 to 95 CE. This is not a synoptic gospel. This was the philosophy of Christianity, if you will. So John is the philosophy of Christianity. Initially considered heretical by some early church fathers because it didn't follow the story of Jesus. It went a philosophical way. 90% different in content than synoptic gospels. Very different language, very high elevated language, very symbolic and allegorical language in the Gospel of John. So it's just not telling a story. It's the only gospel claiming explicitly the divinity of Jesus. This gospel does not focus so much on Jesus is the Messiah. If you read the Gospel of Matthew, the audience is obviously Jews, and it's telling the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah. This is how he is the Messiah, the anointed king. The Gospel of John does the exact opposite. It argues that Jesus is God. Jesus is the incarnation of God. It begins in the beginning. Let's see. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. So there we go. I have a picture here. I left this picture. It's from the book of Revelations. We have an angel as an apocalyptic figure. So the New Testament is the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Then we have the book of Acts, which is the history of Paul and the early Jerusalem church and what they did. Then we have letters of Paul. Then we have the general letters, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude. And finally, we have the book of Revelations, the apocalyptic gospel, later considered heretical by the Protestant Reformed Martin Luther. Other writings, the apostolic fathers, works attributed to some of the original apostles, the Didache, one of these texts focusing on baptism, fasting, prayer, and Eucharist. You can Google some of these texts and read them online if you like. Then we have the surprise, I'm sorry, not yet. We have the New Testament Apocrypha next. These are 2nd century texts helping to establish gaps between Jesus and the early church. Then we have the surprise, the Gnostic texts, which were discovered in 1945, and it shows more diversity of Christianity in the early century. We have two that are pretty well known now, called the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And do Google the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Thomas. You'll get a kind of a more Gnostic element of Christianity than what became the Orthodox view. Between 64 and 330 BCE, persecution and acceptance of Christianity and Judaism by the Roman Empire, obviously. This persecution probably inspired the book of Revelation. Satan is the Roman Empire. That's my view as well. 313 CE, Constantine's Edict of Milan. Christianity receives same privileges of other religions. 330 CE, Constantine moved headquarters from Rome to Byzantium, freely establishing the bishops in Rome over the Western Empire of Christianity. The bishops of Rome became the spokespersons for the widely held orthodoxy of Christianity. It took off pretty fast. Within 200 years, Christianity overtook the religions of Europe. Yeah, pretty much. Although those religions of Europe still, the pagan traditions still existed there. Christianity became major. What if Constantine had not converted to Christianity or did not know enough about Christianity? What would have happened to Christianity? Would it have died out? Would people have been persecuted to a certain degree that the religion could not hold? That's a question for you to answer. and to do some research on Constantine. So the established churches, the churches of the East, were split apart by various doctrinal controversies, and no one bishop could speak for all Eastern Christians. So they needed a edict. They needed a council, and this happened in 325 CE, the Council of Nicaea. Arius believed Christ was created by God and was not God himself, so that's a non-Trinitarian view. The council disagreed. They read the Bible repeatedly. They looked at the scriptures, and they decided that Jesus is, quote, of one substance with the Father. Thus the Trinity is created. The Chalcedonian Creed in 451 CE. Nestorianism denied the unity of Christ's divinity and humanity. Monophysitism, Christ had one nature, part of which was divine and the other part human. The final answer, this is a language, and this is a Greek language, not an English language. Christ has one substance, but two natures. He is both fully human and fully God. And this presentation of being fully human and fully God ultimately was written down in Greek, and then Latin. Roman Catholicism, the church stands as the supreme court to adjudicate between truth and error on important matters. Papal infallibility, when the Pope speaks officially on matters of faith and morals, God protects him from errors. That's the Roman Catholic viewpoint. And we have the St. Peter's Basilica here in the center, a dome similar to the domes in Islam or in the Roman Empire. We have the 7 sacraments in the Roman Catholic Church. Number 1, baptism delivers the soul to the supernatural order. Confirmation, responsibility, and reflection that takes place in one's teenage years, or if you're a convert, you go through controversy or confirmation as well. Holy matrimony is marriage. Marriage is one of the 7 sacraments. Holy orders, dedication to God, monks, nuns, etc. Sacrament of the sick, preparation of the soul, and to focus on the sick and social justice issues. Reconciliation is the confessions of sins, and Mass is the Holy Eucharist or communion that occurs each week. Eastern Orthodoxy broke from Roman Catholic Church in 1054 BCE. I have a picture here of a Eastern Orthodox church. Notice, well, it's cold outside, so they're wearing hats. But some are wearing other types of hats to cover the hair. Honors the same sacraments as the Roman Catholic Church, but viewed some elements of Roman Catholicism as additions to the original biblical texts, such as purgatory, the Immaculate Conception, and the bodily ascension of Mary. They denied those aspects. Focused on Christian consensus of bishops instead of the papal authority. Priests need not remain celibate. The laity are viewed as a royal priesthood. Moving right along in history, we have the Protestant Reformation. Currently, there's more than 34,000 sects of Christianity, even though they don't differ that much in terms of belief system. They tend to be mostly Trinitarian in nature. Is this concept the idea that Paul was trying to criticize at Christianity's beginnings? 34,000 different denominations. Paul was warring against that concept. And the Catholic Church concept is that we are the one, the universal view of Christianity. Then we have all these other churches that start occurring because of the Protestant Reformation. 1517 CE, that's the beginning stages of the Protestant Reformation. And I have a picture here of one of the leaders of the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther. Martin Luther was angered by the sale of indulgences by a monk named Tetzel, who promised people that as soon as their money fell into the coffer, a soul rose from purgatory. So you had to buy your way to heaven. Martin Luther claimed that every Christian was a priest. Faith is the only means to salvation. Every individual could interpret scriptures, and the popes in the church hierarchy were not superior to the believer. He also challenged some aspects of what's called transubstantiation, that bread and wine at Mass was the literal body and blood of Christ. That's the Catholic view. That idea of transubstantiation starts breaking down within the various Protestant churches. I have a note here. It says Protestant reform would not have occurred without noble or aristocratic support. We have another leader named John Calvin. He preached this concept of total depravity. We are spiritually helpless, but God intervenes through the Holy Spirit. So yes, we are individuals, but it's God who makes the choices for us in some ways. We have something called unconditional election. God reveals to the elected or those predestined toward heaven. God elects all the people who will follow him. It sounds quite controversial. Limited atonement. Jesus died for the sins of those already predestined for heaven. Irresistible grace. The elect will realize God. Perseverance of the saints. The elect cannot lose salvation. This idea of the elect versus the non-elect becomes part of history. The Scarlet Letter deals with that. Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne deals with a lot of the ideas of, I think, Calvinism and other traditions of Christianity, such as the Puritans, that stem and originate from Calvinistic thoughts. And we have King Henry VIII, whom you probably know. He established Pope Clement VII refused him an annulment to produce a male heir to the throne, a divorce. So what does he do? Well, we'll start our own religion. Dissolution of the monasteries in England. To this day, there is tension between Catholics and Anglicans, particularly in Ireland. Final point, the state-run religion in England created a newly acquired economy and created a national identity and separation from the Roman Catholic authority. We're kind of hitting the high points of the Protestant Reformation, and I'm going quite fast, I realize. The Anabaptists are next, considered heretical by Catholics and Protestants, and heavily persecuted by both Catholics and Protestants. They are the ones that brought adult baptism to Christianity. They believe that Christians should separate themselves from the world, and the preachers were chosen from the shepherds of the flock. They believed in faith above empty rituals. They practiced pacifism, and the modern followers are the Mennonites, the Amish, and the Brethren. We have a picture here of an Anabaptist getting killed. And the Anabaptists were very much persecuted. So even in the Protestant Reformation, we have violence. By the 17th and 18th century, we have what's called the First Great Awakening. That's the Wesley brothers and George Whitefield in England. Religion resided in the hands of the individual instead of the Church of England or the Puritan movement in the US. So we have this movement away from Puritanism and Anglicanism, even though the Church of England still exists in the United States and elsewhere. Anglicanism may have impacted the colonists' view of independence from England and its church, revivalism in the colonies, the shift of power to congregation and away from papal authority. And as you know, John F. Kennedy was Catholic. That was, is he going to show sympathy to the Catholic Church or to the United States? That was a big platform in the 20th century in running for presidential, as a presidential candidate. Anyway, from 1760 to 1790, Anglicanism and Puritanism reduced its stronghold on early American Christian religions. So we have a beginning of Presbyterianism, the Methodist Church, Baptist, and Congregationalists, among others. The second awakening is this shift away from 18th century Calvinism. And it's a profound emotional and religious experience of conviction and conversion to Christianity. The second awakening is. There's an emphasis on spreading the gospel, the Great Commission, go into the world and preach. It began promoting the idea of universal salvation if one, of course, accepts Christ. The new movement is, so we have this movement away from the elect, the church of the elect. Anybody can be Christian. You might think, well, isn't that the way it was from the beginning when Jesus started feeding the poor? Anyway, you have new movements. You have the Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, the Latter-day Saints, and Jehovah's Witness. Congregational and Presbyterian churches influenced this abolitionist movement. And the image here is of the Latter-day Saint Temple in Utah. Very beautiful architecture. We even have a third great awakening, and I have a picture here of the Salvation Army gathering in 1978. This is the social gospel, the religious activism that occurs in the United States, some of the organizations or churches: Christian Science, Salvation Army, Church of the Nazarenes, Jehovah's Witness, YMCA, Women's Christian Temperance Movement. And you can find all of these, except maybe the Women's Christian Temperance Movement, in Oklahoma City. Finally, we have one new movement, called the Emerging Church. It believes that church needs to change in the wake of postmodern reality. The embrace of postmodern language, the truly infinite God of Christian faith, is beyond our linguistic grasping. Praxis-oriented method of practicing church is creative, experiential, and sensory. How might sitting in a circle, for instance, change worship? What part of a service is the most receptive to Christians? So it asks a lot of questions and doesn't have much dogma in it. It's stressed orthopraxy, or right living. Orthopraxy is right practice, right living instead of a focus on the way we believe. Missional, redemptive work of God in this world. Post-evangelical, suspicious of systematic theology, because not any one theology gets it absolutely right. In versus out, does not speculate on conversion theology of evangelical movements, but rather speaks about ideas forming the narrative of Christ in a postmodern reality. And the Emerging Church political focus is definitely liberal in its focus. So there we have it. There's Christianity, and there are the Christian sects and denominations of Christianity for you. I will talk to you later. Thank you.